The notice arrived on a warm Tuesday afternoon, tucked beneath the front doorknob as though it had been delivered with some ceremonious intent. The bold red lettering stated it clearly: noise violation, $250 fine. The homeowner, a quiet and otherwise unremarkable father named Adam, stood on his porch and stared at it with a rising blend of confusion and irritation. His children had been playing outside the previous afternoon, but hardly in a way that could reasonably be labeled disruptive. Just the usual bubbling laughter and footsteps of two energetic kids enjoying the first burst of spring warmth. For years, Adam had made a point of keeping the peace in the neighborhood. His family moved into the Maple Crest community because it was known for its manicured lawns, calm evenings, and a refreshingly drama-free atmosphere. Yet, in recent months, the HOA, once a benign background presence, had grown increasingly intrusive. A letter about trash cans placed too close to the street, a warning about non-regulation garden lights, and now this, a noise fine that seemed both baseless and deeply personal as Adam read the notice. He couldn't help but think back to the day the new HOA president, a man named Randall Pierce, had taken office. Randall was the kind of neighbor who presented himself with a rigid smile, the kind that never warmed the eyes. He dressed sharply, spoke curtly, and carried himself as though the entire neighborhood was a corporation in need of aggressive restructuring. Many homeowners had joked that he treated Maple Crest like his own private empire. But as informal as those comments were, they began to feel more literal with each passing month. Instead of bringing up the fine with Randall immediately, Adam spent the afternoon reflecting on the previous day's events. His children had been outside for less than an hour, playing with chalk, bubbles, and plastic dinosaurs sprawled across the driveway. There were no screaming fits, no wild games, nothing remotely like the sort of ruckus that would warrant a formal complaint. He found himself pacing the living room, recounting every detail as though preparing for an internal trial, attempting to rationalize a situation that made no sense at all. Evening eventually settled over the neighborhood in a wash of amber streetlights and chirping crickets. Adam stepped out to the porch to think in the quiet, but the quiet never arrived. Instead, he was met with the unmistakable thump of bass echoing across the cul-de-sac. The noise came from Randall's home, a sprawling two-story property perched smugly on the corner lot. This wasn't the first time Adam had noticed it. In recent months, the HOA president's house had become something of a nightlife hub. Cars came and went at late hours, bright lights glowed from the backyard, and muffled music often leaked into the night air. Still, Adam had never complained. He figured it was simply the cost of living near someone who believed the rules did not apply to him. But as he stood on the porch with a noise fine in hand while listening to Randall's thunderous music, something inside him shifted. He watched the president's yard from a distance as silhouettes moved behind the privacy fence. Laughter rolled into the street, louder than the music itself. A sudden burst of amplified sound rattled the quiet atmosphere, and Adam felt his frustration peak. This wasn't a coincidence. If Randall was throwing parties like this on a regular basis, then someone had chosen to target Adam's children instead of acknowledging the true source of the disturbances. That night, he barely slept. He lay in bed, replaying the contradiction between the fine and the endless noise pouring from the president's house. By morning, exhaustion weighed on him, but something else had begun to settle beneath it. Resolve. Adam spent the next day researching options. He looked into noise ordinances, city regulations, HOA rules, and even the community bylaws. The more he read, the more he realized that Maple Crest's rules had been crafted to maintain balance. Rules that Randall seemed to conveniently exempt himself from. Noise past 10 p.m. was a clear violation. Failure to control disruptive gatherings was another. Yet no one had challenged Randall on any of it. He held all the power, and most of the homeowners feared the repercussions of speaking out. But Adam wasn't looking for confrontation for the sake of it. He simply wanted fairness. He wanted his children to play without being policed, and his family to live without feeling watched. If the HOA demanded compliance, then it needed to apply that standard evenly. That's when the idea struck him. Evidence. Unbiased, unquestionable, irrefutable evidence. He ordered a professional-grade sound monitor, one designed for industrial settings where noise measurements had to be accurate within a fraction of a decibel. The device looked unassuming, but its capabilities were exactly what he needed. He spent the following days learning how to use it, testing it at different distances, and verifying its accuracy. If he was going to stand up against the HOA president, he needed to do it meticulously. The next weekend, Randall's routine manifested in full force. Cars lined the street, music pulsed with enough force to vibrate distant windows, and laughter spilled into the night air long after the quiet hours had begun. This time, Adam didn't simply endure it. He positioned the monitor near his property line, noting the time, the decibel levels, and the frequency of the spikes. He sat inside his home with a notebook, documenting the readings with the precision of a researcher preparing a scientific case study as the night progressed. The numbers climbed steadily. 72 decibels at 10:14 p.m., 76 decibels at 10:42 p.m., 81 decibels at 11:07 p.m. The community quiet hours capped noise at 55 decibels. Randall wasn't skirting the limit, he was obliterating it. And he had been for months, hidden behind the guise of authority. By the time the music ceased near 1 a.m., Adam had gathered pages of evidence. He shut off the monitor, feeling a powerful sense of vindication settle over him. But he also knew this was just the beginning. One night of data wasn't enough. He needed a pattern, a documented history that mirrored the HOA's own tendencies to record infractions. Over the course of 2 weeks, he collected everything. Every late-night gathering, every loud burst of music, every spike of noise that soared above legal limits. The numbers piled up, forming a timeline that painted the HOA president as the single largest source of disruption in the entire neighborhood. With each recording, Adam felt the tables slowly turning. The injustice of the fine no longer stung. It fueled him. He began to see the broader picture. Not just a father defending his children, but a homeowner standing up to a system that had begun abusing its own authority. And as the evidence mounted, an idea began to form in the back of his mind. Something larger than a simple countercomplaint. Something that could expose the hypocrisy at the center of the HOA. But before that could happen, he needed to prepare his case meticulously. At the end of the 2 weeks, Adam stacked the printed reports, timestamps, and decibel readings into a thick folder. The weight of it felt symbolic, like holding the truth in physical form. He sat alone at his kitchen table late one night, staring at the folder, knowing that once he submitted it, there would be no going back. The air in the house felt still, loaded with anticipation. Somewhere in the distance, a faint echo of music drifted across the neighborhood, as though Randall's nightly ritual continued without pause. But this time, Adam didn't feel helpless listening to it. The morning after Adam completed his 2-week collection of noise data, he sat at the dining table with the thick folder spread open like the dossier of a major investigation. Sunlight poured in through the windows, illuminating the stacks of timestamp measurements, notes, and printed graphs that mapped the late-night chaos created by the HOA president. The evidence felt comprehensive, objective numbers that no one, not even Randall, could simply brush aside. But Adam had learned enough about the HOA's inner workings to know that presenting the truth directly to the president would accomplish nothing. Randall had built power through intimidation and selective rule enforcement. He controlled the meeting agendas, influenced board members, and maintained a carefully crafted image of authority. If Adam presented the evidence privately, it would disappear without acknowledgement, and the retaliation would be swift. He needed a plan that bypassed Randall's control and prevented the HOA from burying the truth. That meant submitting the evidence in a forum where it could not be quietly dismissed. A public HOA meeting. Maple Crest held its monthly meetings in the community center, a modest building near the neighborhood's entrance. Attendance was usually sparse, but Adam suspected that might change with the right push. He knew others had their own frustrations with the HOA president. The whispers were everywhere. Uneven fines, special treatment for certain board members, and sudden policy changes that benefited no one but those in power. Yet residents kept quiet, afraid of drawing attention to themselves. It wasn't fearlessness that drove Adam forward, just a growing sense of responsibility. If he didn't speak up, nothing would change. And if nothing changed, The neighborhood would continue sliding deeper into Randall's authoritarian rule. In the days leading up to the meeting, Adam prepared his materials carefully. He organized the evidence into clear sections: noise levels, ordinance violations, timestamps, and even a summary comparing the readings to the HOA's official quiet hours policy. Each piece of data told the same story, a story of blatant violations committed repeatedly by the same person enforcing fines on others. But evidence alone wouldn't guarantee change. The community needed to see it. They needed to understand the magnitude of what was happening right under their noses. So Adam made copies. Dozens of them. He slid each packet into a simple manila envelope, labeling them with the date of the upcoming HOA meeting. For a moment, he wondered whether he was overstepping some invisible boundary, whether turning the tables on the HOA president would ultimately bring more turmoil into his family's life. But then he remembered the noise fine pinned to his refrigerator door, the symbolic reminder of everything wrong with how the neighborhood was being run. He remembered his children sitting quietly inside as Randall's late-night gatherings roared beneath the stars. And he remembered the sinking feeling of knowing the people meant to protect fairness were the ones eroding it. By the time the evening of the meeting arrived, Adam felt a steady calm settle over him. The community center parking lot was more crowded than usual, an unexpected sight that filled him with cautious optimism. Word had apparently spread about the noise fine incident, and curiosity had drawn the residents inside. The meeting room buzzed with quiet chatter. Folding chairs lined the space, facing a long table where the HOA board members sat. At the center of that table was Randall, wearing a polished expression that tried to mask annoyance at the unusually large turnout. His gaze swept across the room, tightening momentarily when it landed on Adam, who sat near the front with the folder tucked beneath his ARMS. Residents settled in. The meeting began with routine reports, financial updates, landscaping notices, upcoming maintenance schedules. Adam listened with half an ear, aware that Randall was delaying the discussion of homeowner concerns. It was a common tactic: prolong small matters until time ran thin, leaving little room for grievances that challenged the board's authority. But tonight, Adam was prepared. When the moment arrived for open comments, he rose from his seat with deliberate calm. The room quieted as he walked to the front, the thick folder in hand. He felt dozens of eyes on him, curious, expectant, hopeful. He approached the community microphone, adjusted it slightly, and placed the folder on the table facing the board. There was no need for theatrics. The truth itself was powerful enough. In clear, steady words, he explained the situation: the noise fine issued against his family, the repeated late-night disturbances from the HOA president's home, and the steps he had taken to gather objective data. He mentioned the sound monitor, the 2-week collection period, and the exact decibel readings that far exceeded both HOA and city limits. Each detail built upon the last, forming a narrative that left no room for misinterpretation. Randall shifted uncomfortably, attempting to maintain composure as Adam calmly laid out the evidence. When Adam distributed the copies he had prepared, the room rustled with the sound of pages being flipped and examined. The board members leaned forward, brows knitting with concern. The homeowners murmured among themselves, their whispers filled with surprise and vindication. As the weight of the evidence settled over the room, a palpable shift occurred. For the first time in months, perhaps years, the HOA president's authority visibly cracked. Adam continued his presentation, noting that the purpose of the evidence wasn't retaliation, but accountability. He emphasized that rules should be applied consistently, that no homeowner should live under fear of selective enforcement, and that leadership should adhere to the same standards they imposed on others. The room grew exceptionally quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes a turning point. Then, slowly, homeowners began raising their hands, not with complaints about Adam, but with their own stories. Stories of unfair fines, inconsistent rules, unexplained fees, and instances where the HOA president seemed to bend policies for his friends while cracking down on others without basis. One by one, the testimonies spilled into the room, forming a collective voice stronger than any single complaint. The board members listened, some nodding, others scribbling notes. Randall sat rigidly, the faint flush of embarrassment spreading from his collar to his cheeks. By the time the open forum ended, the atmosphere had transformed entirely. What began as a standard meeting had become a reckoning, a confrontation of everything wrong with the HOA's current leadership. The board announced that they would review the evidence, investigate the noise violations thoroughly, and suspend all related fines until the matter was resolved. As the meeting adjourned, residents gathered around Adam, thanking him for stepping forward, for taking the risk, for doing what many had been too afraid to do. Their gratitude was quiet, but deeply sincere. Adam left the community center with a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't know what the final outcome would be, but something had undeniably shifted. The truth was out, and the community had finally seen what had been happening behind closed doors. Yet as he walked into the cool night air, a lingering unease followed him. A subtle awareness that Randall would not accept this challenge without a fight. The HOA president had built his power carefully, and now it was slipping through his fingers. Men like him rarely surrendered quietly. In the days following the HOA meeting, Maple Crest carried an unusual tension, subtle at first, but unmistakably present. Neighbors walked their dogs with slower strides, pausing to exchange murmured updates about the upcoming investigation. Cars that normally passed without notice lingered at community intersections, their drivers glancing toward the HOA president's house with quiet scrutiny. Even the air felt different, as if the entire neighborhood were collectively holding its breath. For the first time since Adam moved to Maple Crest, people weren't whispering about the HOA's questionable practices. They were openly acknowledging them. The meeting had cracked something wide open, something that could no longer be patched with polite smiles or generic reminders of community harmony. And at the center of it all stood Randall Pierce, the president who had presided over Maple Crest with an iron fist masquerading as civic responsibility. Randall's veneer of control began to show visible fractures almost immediately. Homeowners noticed his car leaving earlier in the mornings and returning later at night, as though avoiding interactions he once welcomed. The boisterous parties that typically rattled Maple Crest after sunset fell curiously silent, replaced by a cold stillness that only emphasized their absence. Even the once rigid spreadsheet of HOA emails slowed. The steady stream of warnings, reminders, and updates abruptly reduced to a trickle. But silence didn't mean surrender. As Adam expected, Randall wasn't the type to simply absorb a blow without attempting to strike back. It didn't take long before the retaliation arrived, subtle at first, then unmistakably targeted. A new letter appeared in Adam's mailbox on a humid Thursday afternoon. Notice of landscaping noncompliance. According to the HOA, his grass was slightly uneven and may require attention to align with community standards. It was a thinly veiled attempt at intimidation, transparent in its timing and insultingly petty. Adam didn't react, not outwardly. Instead, he cataloged the letter and added it to the growing timeline of harassment, knowing that each new attempt to punish him strengthened his position. If Randall wanted to demonstrate abuse of power, Adam would document every detail. Yet Adam wasn't the only target. Within the same week, 3 households that had spoken against the president at the meeting received warnings of their own. Alleged parking infractions, porch clutter, and even a bizarre notice about inappropriate wind chime placement. The pattern was clear. Randall intended to reassert control by reminding homeowners how easily he could disrupt their peace. But this time, the neighborhood was watching. Each warning that landed in a mailbox was photographed, shared, and collectively dissected in group chats that had sprung to life after the meeting. What once might have intimidated residents now only fueled their resolve. The retaliation didn't silence them. It unified them. Soon, calls for change grew louder. Homeowners began requesting copies of HOA policy documents, financial records, and internal communications, materials the board was obligated to provide but had rarely been asked for. When the requests flooded the HOA office, the board realized that Maple Crest was no longer a passive community. It was becoming an active one. The turning point came when the HOA's treasurer, a mild-mannered accountant named Thomas Kincaid, reached out to Adam privately. Thomas had always been overshadowed by Randall's domineering presence. But he, too, had noticed inconsistencies in the way the president handled community funds, particularly expenses tied to social engagements and maintenance services that didn't seem to exist. Thomas provided Adam with the missing puzzle pieces, documents that showed not only the noise violations but financial discrepancies that hinted at deeper misconduct. For months, Randall had been diverting HOA funds for personal use, categorizing party expenses as community-building initiatives, and billing private backyard upgrades as shared property improvements. What began as a battle over noise had now grown into a full exposure of unethical conduct. Armed with this new information, Adam prepared one final packet, a comprehensive report that paired his noise data with the financial inconsistencies, outlining a clear pattern of misconduct. He shared the packet with the board members who had expressed concerns after the last meeting, ensuring it reached every person not tightly aligned with Randall. With enough evidence collected, the board scheduled an emergency assembly, one that Randall could not avoid. The night of the assembly, the community center overflowed. Residents filled the chairs, lined the walls, and stood shoulder to shoulder in the hallway, united by a shared purpose. The air carried a charge of collective determination, a feeling that something irreversible was about to happen. The meeting opened quietly. Board members took their seats, their expressions composed but tense. Randall entered last, his posture stiff and defensive, as though bracing for impact. Gone was the confident stride he once carried. He took his seat at the center of the table, avoiding eye contact with the homeowners gathered in front of him. The board began by addressing the investigation. They presented the findings clearly and factually. The repeated noise violations, the misuse of HOA funds, and the retaliatory fines issued after the previous meeting. Copies of the compiled evidence circulated through the room, pages rustling like a growing wind as the details unfolded. The atmosphere shifted from tense silence to indignant disbelief. Gasps punctuated the air. A few residents exchanged sharp glances. Others shook their heads slowly, absorbing the magnitude of what had been happening behind closed doors to be by the time the final report was presented. The weight of the truth was undeniable. The board called for a vote of no confidence in the HOA president. That it was swift, decisive, and overwhelming. Randall sat motionless as the votes were tallied. Residents raising their hands one by one, a wave of arms sweeping through the room like a tide of long-suppressed frustration. The final count left no ambiguity. Randall was removed from his position effective immediately. A new interim president was appointed, a soft-spoken woman named Maria who had served on the board quietly for years, consistently advocating for fairness. She accepted the role with humility, acknowledging the responsibility placed upon her and promising immediate reforms. When the assembly concluded, the room erupted in murmured conversations, relief mingling with celebration. The community had not only reclaimed its HOA but reshaped its identity. Yet amid the energy of change, Adam stepped outside into the cool night air, seeking a moment of reflection. The sky overhead was unusually clear, stars pricking the darkness like tiny beacons. He stood on the community center steps, listening to the quiet. Truly quiet. No distant bass, no echo of late-night revelry. Just the soft hum of a peaceful neighborhood. That it struck him then how profoundly the atmosphere had shifted. What began as an unjust noise fine had sparked something far greater. A movement that toppled a corrupt leader and restored balance to the community. Within days, the retaliatory notices were rescinded. The noise fine against Adam was dismissed entirely. New policies were drafted to ensure transparency, fairness, and accountability. Homeowners who had once been afraid to speak now participated readily, shaping decisions without fear of retribution. As for Adam, he resumed his life with quiet satisfaction. His children played freely again, their laughter ringing through the yard without judgment or consequence. The neighborhood felt lighter, brighter, and more connected than it had in years. But the most gratifying change wasn't visible. It was the newfound confidence among residents who realized they had a voice after all. Maple Crest wasn't perfect, but it was theirs again. Not ruled by fear, but guided by fairness. Not fractured by authority, but restored by unity. And every peaceful evening, as Adam watched the sun dip behind the rooftops, he remembered the exact moment the shift began. A simple, petty noise fine tucked beneath his door. An attempt at control that sparked a revolt instead, a reminder that sometimes, the quietest people ignite the loudest change.